Welcome back to Just Talking with Joe Burdick. Today's guest is someone I've truly been looking forward to sitting down with. Mike Durant is a retired U.S. Army Blackhawk pilot, a member of the legendary 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers, and a veteran of some of the most intense combat operations in modern military history. He served over 2 decades in the Army, flew missions and operations like Desert Storm and Gothic Serpent, and is a recipient of honors including the Distinguished Flying Cross, Bronze Star, Army Commendation Medal, Meritorious Service Medal, Purple Heart, and the Prisoner of War Medal, to name a few. He is also in the Army Aviation Hall of Fame. But beyond all that, he's a husband, a father, a grandfather, an author, motivational speaker, entrepreneur, and someone whose story many people were introduced to through Blackhawk Down. Mike, it's truly an honor to talk to you. Thank you for wanting to continue to tell your story. I'm sure we all ask the same questions, but for me, this is an honor. So thanks for doing this for me, Mike.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Well, before the world knew your story, take me back. What made you want to join the Army?
Well, I had an opportunity to fly in a helicopter at a fairly young age. I think I was probably 13 or 14 years old, and just thought it was amazing when I found out that you could do that as a profession. I'd not encountered anything to that point. Of course, I dreamed about being a professional hockey player and things like that, like all young kids do. But those were probably out of reach for somebody with my lackluster abilities. But when I found out that the military would teach me how to fly and I could do that as a job, that became my number one goal. And fortunate, certainly, that my timing was right. There were opportunities for me to do it. And right after I joined the Army, I went to flight school and got to fly my dream aircraft, the Blackhawk, as soon as I graduated.
That's awesome. Off topic a little bit, what position did you play in hockey?
Well, so as a young player, I played goalie, and we all have different experiences in sports, I guess, but being a goalie in that particular time and place was pretty tough. We didn't get a lot of specific goalie training. It was, you basically got told, get in the net and stop the puck, and it's emotionally difficult as a young person, because you feel, if you lose, you feel like it's your fault, but if you win, you really didn't win because you didn't score any goals. And I wanted to do other things, so I stopped playing about the time I actually flew in this helicopter. And I picked it back up later in life, and I played, and I still play. I play left wing, and I love it. If I would have played left wing when I was a kid, I never would have stopped. There's no question about it, because it's a fun game. Scoring goals is just over the top, and I still enjoy it today.
Up until a few years ago, I was playing in an old man's hockey league, Hockey North America, and man, I'll tell you, I loved lacing up the skates and playing. It was so much fun.
Yeah, you'll love this. I just did a fundraiser hockey event back in December that had a bunch of former NHL guys that we all got to play with, and I played with some good players before, but when you get out there when half the team is, been at that level, it's a different game. To put it in perspective, the two goalies were Marc-Andre Fleury and Henrik Lundqvist. So, we had some talent out there, and it was a lot of fun. So I hope I can play, for years to come. We'll see.
Did you score on him?
I got 4 shots on Fleury, and of course he stopped them all. But I had a couple decent chances.
One of my last games I played in, we had a girl. She was on the women's Olympic hockey team. She came and skated with us, and thankfully she was on our team. She was amazing, and I really had wished my daughter could have been there to see how she made every one of us guys look like we had no business playing. But I love hockey.
Yeah. So I've seen that before. We had a young girl that played here in North Alabama that was like that. She showed up for men's league, and everybody wanted her on the team because she could pretty much skate around most of the folks out there.
The women's hockey, they're tough. So
Oh, it's fun to watch, and obviously, what a year for the Olympic, both the men's and women's teams. Just an amazing sport. I'm always surprised that it's gained popularity for sure, but it isn't even more popular than it is because we took some friends here that had never been to a live hockey game before. We went to Nashville and watched the Predators, and when that was over, they just couldn't believe it. They said that was the most exciting sporting event they'd ever been to.
Yeah, it really is. My son and I went to. He had never been to an NHL game. We have the Cleveland Monsters here at AHL team. But so a friend of mine works for the Chicago Blackhawks. Speaking of Blackhawks, her dad was Chris Chelios. So anyway, she gave us tickets for a game, so I got to take my son to see the Blackhawks, and he was blown away at the speed and everything about it. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, Chris Chelios was actually there at that event back in December also. Yeah.
Oh, is that right?
A lot of big name guys. Yeah.
All right. So let's talk. What were you doing before flight school?
Well, I wanted to go straight to flight school. But when I spoke to the recruiter, he told me that the what we call high school to flight school wasn't available. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. They all have a job to do. They're trying to get people to fill certain slots.
Never lie.
So my strategy was, okay, I'll go ahead and join, and I'll apply for flight school from active duty. There's some risk involved in that, but I to mitigate that, I decided to only sign up for 3 years because it is what I wanted to do, and so I got into military intelligence. I went to Defense Language Institute, which, when I talk to people about those opportunities, they convinced me that, yeah, it's not flight school, but that's a pretty good, opportunity to go to that, get that training. And so I did that. And then once I got to my duty station, I applied and got into flight school.
How long were you there before you were able to switch over?
Well, I went, DLI and basic and all of that was about a year. And then I was in Panama for a little over a year working in my MOS. And then I applied. So just short of 3 years before I got to flight school.
Okay. And walk me through flight school. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it's different now. But essentially, it takes you from, like, for me, I had never touched the controls of an aircraft. Mm-hmm. And that's not that unusual. I mean, some people have a little bit of private flight time when they go, but most have never flown an aircraft. Today we can fly Microsoft Flight Simulator at least, or other types of flight simulators. I think that was bought by somebody. But anyway, you can get familiar with the instruments and, things you couldn't do back then. Mm-hmm. Initially, for us, it was turn you into a warrant officer candidate first. So it's essentially like officer candidate school, very abbreviated. I think it was 6 weeks, but they're teaching you about just various professional development kind of things that have nothing to do with aviation. And then once you make it through that, you start primary flight training in a very primitive, basic aircraft that's actually pretty hard to fly. Then, you solo, you progress, and you gain a little bit of flight time. And then at the time, you would move into Hueys for the last phases of flight school. And again, flight school is almost a year. So all this happens in over about a 12-month period. And depending on where you are in the class, at the time, it's different now, you could get slots for advanced aircraft. And the only advanced aircraft that existed at the time were the Chinook and the Blackhawk. And the Blackhawk was brand new. And we had one Chinook slot and one Blackhawk slot in our class. And I happened to get the Blackhawk. And, like I said, from the moment I had seen that platform, I thought, man, that's like a spaceship. It's like the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. And I lucked out. Did well, got it, and went straight into the training, and then got assigned to Korea flying medevac as my first assignment.
Yeah, I heard you on other podcasts talking about Korea. You got a lot of flight hours in there. That must have been fun.
Well, not only is it fun, but it's important. whenever I do talk to people that are considering this course of action in terms of their career, I encourage them to think about not only, first of all, aviation's fantastic. It really is. It's just there's a culture there. Again, it's probably changed a little bit, but there's a culture both in civilian aviation and military aviation that I really haven't seen anywhere else in terms of professionalism and that's why the safety record is what it is, because everybody understands how critical their role is in keeping flying safe and timely and productive and professional. But anyway, the thing about Korea and flying is when you're new, the more time you get in the seat, the better. And if you end up in an aircraft that you're not going to fly a lot, it's hard to progress. I mean, today we have very advanced simulators, and those are good. I mean, I worked in the simulator industry for a while, but there's just some things about flying the actual machine that are very difficult to replicate, although we're getting close. But anyway, getting a lot of flight time to me really helped me, because not only did I get a lot of flight time, but I progressed to being a pilot in command really quickly. So, you're put in these situations where you have to make decisions, and you're gaining more and more experience with the platform, the mission, and it really helped develop me as a young aviator.
And speaking of being a young aviator, how old were you at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I showed up in Korea. Let's see here. It would have been early 83. So I was 21.
Wow.
Yeah.
And flying around the DMZ, what was that like?
Well, it's a little bit intimidating at first. And I ended up, again, because I was the first Blackhawk pilot to get to that unit. The unit still had Hueys. And we were, scheduled to get Blackhawks later on that year. And because I was the first Blackhawk guy, they made me a unit trainer, which is sort of a step down from an instructor pilot. You have a very specific thing that you are qualified to train other people on. And for me, it was the DMZ. And we had to memorize it, because obviously, crossing the DMZ is hazardous to your health. I mean, North Koreans shoot you down. They have, and probably would today if aircraft cross the DMZ. So as the medevac pilots, you're called to go close to the DMZ. So you got to know, not just be able to navigate on a map, but know it so well that you will just, it's very unlikely that you would cross it. So I train people how to memorize the route from one coast to the other of Korea, and just logged a ton of time doing that.
So that was peacetime. Did you get a lot of action or as a medevac, or was it just training?
No, it was a lot of action. In fact, we tracked how many missions you got, actual missions, transferring patients first on the scene kind of stuff. And you would get a recognition when you reach milestones. And I ended up flying 150 missions before my time there was up, and I got a 150 mission patch. And, some were somewhat routine. You go to a field hospital somewhere and transfer someone to a main hospital, but some were, first on the scene, traffic accident, injured soldier out in the field, injured dependent out in the middle of the mountains somewhere, hoisting people and during floods. I mean, it was, like I said, and I wasn't real enthusiastic about it when I first got the assignment, but looking back, it's arguably one of the best assignments you could get, because you just do so many things. You're forced to make decisions, single aircraft, pilot in command, bad weather, mountains, wires. You got the pressure of a real world mission that, influences your decision making. So it really, really, really helped develop me personally as an aviator.
Was night vision a technology we had back then?
Believe it or not, I got qualified on night vision goggles in flight school, and it's funny now, but I'll tell you, it wasn't at the time. We were still flying at the time what we call full face goggles. Goggles originally started to drive ground vehicles, and basically it's putting a box on the front of your face with two tubes sticking out. And somebody realized, there's no reason for this box. We need to cut this away. So they actually cut the frame of the box, and now you could at least look under, because when you're flying, or when you're driving too, but it's probably more critical when you're flying, you need to look down and see what your airspeed is like. Where, are you holding your altitude correctly? Are you in trim? Checking the instruments, all these things, right? And to do so with this box on your face, you had to actually focus the goggles inside the cockpit, look at what you want to look at, then focus back outside. That's obviously a non-starter, right? But we flew them for a while like that. And I believe I was actually in the last class that got qualified using night vision goggles that were not cut away. And at that point, going forward, not only were they cut away, but they were specifically designed to mount on your helmet without any kind of frame whatsoever around the goggles.
Did the Blackhawk ever start using a HUD? When I worked on Hornets, we had the HUD, which I thought was pretty amazing.
Yeah, there's an Anvis HUD, they call it, that I'm not 100% sure is still being used today, but it probably is. And for night vision flying, it goes on the end of the tube, and it gives you mission or flight data in your goggle display. And then when ultimately, we'll get to this, but when we developed and flew the armed Blackhawks, we started putting CCIP, continuously computed impact point heads-up displays that basically drop down. It's like almost like people would think of it as more like a periscope, right? It dropped down and you're looking through it, and it helps you, put your aim point on the target. So those are basically the two kind of HUDs that we had.
So when did you start to feel confident, not just flying, but trusting yourself in the cockpit?
Pretty early. I mean, I felt pretty good. I did good in flight school. I ended up being number 2 in the class. I should have been number 1, but I had one check ride where I still disagree with the instructor's assessment of what happened. And it was the most important check ride in all of flight school. I passed, but my grade was not as high as I felt it should have been. And I didn't make a big deal of it. I just pressed on. But anyway, I had no trouble with instruments. I just felt pretty natural in the cockpit. And, most people learn how to fly. Not everybody, I would say, seems to take to it like I think I did. But, most people can learn how to do it. And it was just one of those things. Like I said, I'm not a great athlete. I'm a decent student, but I really felt probably one of the best things I've ever felt I could do was fly that machine.
Well, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but what's the difference between regular Army aviation and SOAR?
Well, for special ops, first of all, you have to volunteer. You have to assess, and then you have to go through. If you're accepted, you have to go through another. I mean, when I think about from the time I signed into the unit to the time I showed up at the actual company, the flight line, was almost a year. So it's a whole nother, year of training, and you have a different customer set. Now, that's not to say that a conventional, unit can't support some of these special mission units. And I mean, I remember when I was in the 101st, we did a mission supporting the Rangers, and which is a typical customer for the 160th. And they were just over the moon about how we did, because it just went really well. So, but we never supported, in the conventional force, you're never going to support Delta, you're never going to support SEAL Team 6 or any of those elite organizations. So it's a different customer. The missions are slightly different. They're more varied. I'm pretty sure the Army started doing fast roping somewhere along the way, although I'm not 100% sure actually. But things like that. That maneuver is, it's pretty difficult under night vision goggles. If you're hitting a building rooftop or fast roping to a ship or something like that, it's pretty difficult. So you want more experienced people, trying to do these complex missions. And then the aircraft itself is quite a bit different. I mean, there's a lot of mission equipment that you find in the special ops aircraft that you just don't find out there in the conventional force. And then for us, we arm the Blackhawk, which still doesn't exist anywhere else in the U.S. military.
Well, going back to the 101st, so after Korea, where did you go after Korea?
To Fort Campbell, and I got orders for the 101st, and I wanted to go to the 160th because I had heard about it, but I went to Campbell, which is also where the 160th is, and I signed in to the 101st, and then I went over and talked to the recruiter at the 160th, and they said, "Well, unfortunately, you've already signed in to the 101st, which pretty much locks you in for 2 years. I mean, if you were really valuable, a seasoned guy with thousands of hours that we really wanted, maybe we could, try to pull some strings and get you out of that. But it's probably and this is them speaking to me, it's probably in your best interest to go ahead and do that 2 years in the 101st, get some more formation flying. That's the one thing you don't do much of, or any of really in medevac, is multi-ship operations, which again, that's another, there's a technique to it. It helps to have some, time under your belt doing that, both, in day conditions and night vision goggles. We didn't do much sling loads. Not that we do really any sling loads in the 160th, but we, there's just some different missions that, and tasks that I hadn't done in the medevac that I had an opportunity to do in the 101st. And in the end, it really was the right answer. I got to go to the instructor pilot course while I was there. So now I'm showing up with a lot more flight time, a lot more night vision goggle time, formation flying, multi-ship, air assaults. I'm an instructor. So, it all worked out in the best for me and for the unit.
One of the stories that I've heard you tell that I hope you'll tell it to me, but when you got to take your dad for a ride, how much of a thrill was that for your dad?
Yeah, so that's back in Korea, and as time goes on, as a result of many factors, it gets harder and harder to do certain things, because somewhere along the way, someone did something stupid or an accident happened or something. Mm-hmm. But I'm fortunate that I had a commander at the time in Korea who realized, or I convinced, that, hey, my father's in the National Guard. So it isn't quite like taking a civilian, off the street and sticking him on the aircraft. Now he's, not on guard duty, but he's in the guard and he's coming over. Can I take him on a flight? And they gave me permission to do it. And we flew along the DMZ. I probably scared the crap out of him because you can imagine that, I'm trying to, I would use the word, impress him with both the capabilities of the aircraft and my capabilities. At the time, we could fly, you could do a 90-degree bank in a Blackhawk. That's no longer authorized. But for fixed wing, 90 degrees, not that big a deal. But helicopters, a 90-degree bank is pretty significant because, all of your lift is now sideways. So you if you don't do it right, you can come out of the sky pretty quickly. And anyhow, we're at low altitude, so I'm flying around the DMZ doing 90-degree banks, and my father's in the back, and he's probably regretting the fact that he agreed to go along. But I'm sure it was a memorable experience for him.
So I was in Navy aviation, and admittedly, I didn't know much about Army aviation until I actually heard your podcast, and now I'm obsessed. I didn't know anything about the 160th. And like I said, I had retired CW04 Ryan Walters on my podcast in January. But at some point, you made your way to the 160th. How did you first hear about them? Because they were still relatively new.
Yeah, and when we call covert organizations, we call them black organizations. So at the time, it was sort of quasi-black. Nobody really talked about it openly. You'd never see any articles about it. You wouldn't. The unit wouldn't be at a trade show. They weren't sending recruiters around. I mean, you had to just know somebody who knew somebody. And it was when I was in Korea. I don't remember if this guy had assessed and didn't make it or knew somebody that assessed. But anyway, he started talking about this unit. And again, this is the mid 80s. So the unit's only a couple of years old at this point. And it definitely piqued my interest. I always say I was a Tom Clancy reader, and to me, this was Tom Clancy-ish, and it really was. It's very high-profile missions with elite organizations and highly classified stuff going on. And I just, I thought, look, I'm enjoying aviation. I like what I'm doing, but there's always, where can I go next? And that's why I got interested in going.
When people hear elite unit, I don't think they really understand what that means. So what was the selection process like?
Yeah. So, and as I mentioned earlier, you have to volunteer, then you have to assess, and it's a phased assessment. I mean, you do a physical fitness test, and a lot of these organizations will do things like tell you start running, and we're not going to tell you how far you have to run, and we'll tell you when you're done. Just stuff like that. I don't want to call it a mind game. They're just trying to make sure that they've got people coming into these formations that are adaptable, can overcome challenges, are not going to come up short if there's any possible way to avoid it. And so anyway, you do a physical fitness test, you do a swim test, you do a psych eval, physical, flight check, board. I mean, it's pretty similar to what a lot of the other, the Delta selection, and I'm not going to try to compare it to Delta selection. That's much more in depth and prolonged, but it's similar. And at the end, you're in your dress uniform, and you're sitting in front of a bunch of people that act like that, they want to kill you, and ask very difficult questions, and you have to convince them why you should be allowed into the formation. And then you go out of the room and you come back, and they tell you whether or not you've been accepted to go to Green Platoon, which then starts that training that has a black day when it starts. And again, we actually had a bell for a while, just like SEAL training does, but on my understanding is they got rid of it, and I don't know why. I'm sure there were maybe too many people that were ringing it that really could have stayed had they not been given that very easy opportunity to bail out. I'm not sure, but bottom line is, again, it's trying to stress you. It's trying to test you physically, mentally, make sure you've got the will to get through whatever it takes to serve in that organization, and then you start to learn all the special equipment. You start to learn all the different tactics and procedures that are utilized. There's a lot of focus on navigation, because our primary job is to get either customers or ordnance on target on time, and we have to. There are no exceptions. I mean, it has to be on time every time. So we really stress, okay, well, we have GPS. We've had it for, 30 years now. But if we're, denied access to the satellites, or there's a equipment failure, you still have to be able to get there. And so, a lot of it, and I'm assuming it's still the case, is paper map, planning, being able to do it with technology or without. And, there's hours and hours and hours and hours spent doing that. And then again, once that training's all complete, and you do check rides throughout it, but you get a final check ride by a seasoned aviator in the unit that can decide whether or not, you meet the standard. And that training takes about a year. And then you're a FNG, a freaking new guy, when you get to the unit. And some of the units are still like this. I don't think it's quite as prevalent as it was at the time, but you really don't even get talked to. I mean, until you prove yourself, you are like nobody. And just shut up and, show up when you're told to show up, and get in the seat and do what you're asked to do. And then as you sort of build credibility, and again, you're still only, you're a co-pilot, and you have to get basic mission qualified, then you can become a pilot in command as a BMQ, but you can't fly customer missions. Once you continue to progress, you become full mission qualified, meaning you can be pilot in command for customer missions. And then the highest level outside of the instructor track is flight lead. And now you're planning and leading these complex operations with the customers. And I progressed all the way to flight lead pretty fast. I took my check ride actually in Desert Storm. So it would have been 1991. So I guess I took it in just over 2 years. And I was a flight lead both in the Armed Blackhawk and in the assault aircraft.
So the first time you got to shoot some ordnance off the Blackhawk, what was that like?
Yeah. Well, first of all, very fortunate for me. My timing was good. I got there right at the time that the idea was being socialized and the leadership was endorsing it and the funding was being put in place to modify the aircraft. I mean, we did all this in-house. I mean, this was not, Sikorsky didn't do this. Obviously, they probably provided some engineering support, but it was all done, grassroots effort. Hey, we already had the miniguns in a configuration where you could fix them forward. But, now we're going to put rocket pods on there, and that's the first step. And then we're going to put Hellfires on there, and that's the next step. And then 30 millimeter and, incrementally over time. And I mean, it was just a blast. And again, as an instructor, we had to shoot a lot, period. But now you've got to accompany other people to make their currency meet their currency requirements and then train them. So we're just shooting nonstop. I mean, we shot hundreds of rockets and thousands and thousands and thousands of rounds of ammunition every month. I mean, it was nonstop because we were allowed to shoot what we call danger close, which is up to 50 meters from customers on the ground. And that's close. I mean, when you start talking about high explosive ordnance, at night under night vision goggles, when you got people on the move on the ground, there's a lot to that. And to be able to do it effectively when called upon requires a pretty good amount of training. And the good news is we had the budget to do it, and we shot the hell out of those aircraft.
A lot of combat veterans, when they write a book or they talk about you guys and what you did, it must make you feel pretty good to know the respect you had from the guys on the ground while you were doing what you were doing up in the air.
It does. It makes me proud to be a part of the organization, and that respect and it's mutual for sure, comes as a result of decades of Night Stalkers, executing very dangerous and difficult missions, and upholding that standard and that commitment that we have to that ground customer that if they need us, we're going to be there.
Mm-hmm. Did you go through SEAR school when you were with the Night Stalkers or when you were your first flight school?
Yeah. So when I went to flight school, it was prior to all Army aviators going to survival school. That actually changed after Desert Storm, I believe. Anyway, I'm not sure exactly when the Army made a change and decided that all aviators needed to go to survival school, but when I went, only the 160th was going. So we piggybacked onto either the Air Force at Fairchild or the Army. It was a piece of the Special Forces Qualification Course, which is the one I went to at Fort Bragg, or the Navy course in Maine. And we would, depending on your timing, you might go to any of the three. And I ended up going to the SF phase series. And oddly enough, I ended up being the first person to attend that course to ever use that training in the real world, as I understand it. If anyone else did, it was within a Black organization that is not publicly acknowledged, but I don't know of anyone who did. So they were very interested in, my feedback on how effective the course was. And I'm sure made some tweaks based on some of the comments that I had after the fact.
How did the training change the way you handled pressure and chaos when you were especially going through Night Stalker school?
Yeah, I mean, well, everyone in aviation focuses on stressful situations. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're flying for the airlines, you're going to be challenged with, very difficult situations, usually today in a simulator, if it's really that extreme. But it's still, there are people who come out of flight simulators soaking wet from the stress of trying to survive a scenario that maybe it's equipment failure, bad weather, you know, whatever. So, I think that the question really applies in a broader sense to aviation in general. Um, but the more training you do, the more realistic that training is, the better prepared you are for when you face those challenges on a real operation. The whole train as you fight mentality, I think, is a big part. And it's not, I think, is absolutely a big part of why our military is as capable as it is. I mean, you think again, the Venezuela mission, Iran, everything that we do as a nation with our military is done to a standard that I would say is pretty much unmatched across the board. And that's because we're resourced. Not everything. I'm sure not every commander out there's got what they want, but in general terms, we're resourced pretty well. We train, and we're ready to execute when called upon.
Well, I think people probably forget before Mogadishu, there were already some real world high stakes missions like Desert Storm. So, what made the 160th so effective in combat?
Yeah, I mean, it goes all the way back to the birth of the unit. I mean, the unit was created because in the failed attempt to rescue the hostages in Tehran, one of the conclusions was we don't have a standing force that can do this, and we need to create one. Well, there already was one created because there was going to be a second attempt. That's not necessarily generally known by the public, but there were already rehearsals going on with a primarily Army force to go back into Tehran, because after the failed attempt, the prisoners were still being held. And so you've got this sort of unit that's just sort of come to life that is developing night vision tactics and modifying the aircraft for long range assaults, and flying desert ops out in the Southwest. And if you are serious about we need a standing force, this is the sort of the genesis of it. Let's keep this going. And whoever it was that made the ultimate decision made the right decision to keep the unit going. And then shortly thereafter, the unit got its baptism by fire in Grenada, and multiple situations there where we lost our first aviators to enemy fire. Multiple aircraft got pounded because, unfortunately, although we were prepared to go at night, the whole force was not. So the mission got delayed till daylight hours, and that really, really caused some additional losses to be taken by our organization. But one of the things, which is where the unit motto comes from, Night Stalkers Don't Quit, I think, is one aircraft took heavy fire on the infill, had to break off, regroup, but then went back in and completed the infill. And after taking, numerous hits, and the phrase Night Stalkers Don't Quit was coined by, I believe, our customers, and that became the unit motto. And then from that point on, it's every conflict. I mean, you name a conflict, we've been there, and usually are probably one of the first, and oftentimes the last to leave. So it's an amazing organization, but it asks a lot of the people who are there, certainly in times of conflict.
So, during Desert Storm, did you get a lot of missions during that?
Absolutely, yeah. Our mission. So the mission of the task force was to hunt the Scuds in Western Iraq, which was a huge, huge part of that political equation there. Saddam wanted to draw the Israelis into the fight because he wanted to fracture the coalition, which included some Arab nations. And, the relationships weren't quite what they are today. And the belief was, if the Israelis join the fight, this coalition's over. It's going to end up being just the U.S. and the Israelis. And our leadership didn't want to see that. So the main objective was to keep Saddam from getting Scud launches into Israel, which he had done. He had gotten a couple in there, but at that point we were able to hold the Israelis at bay. So anyway, we're putting Delta on the ground with ground vehicles in the middle of the night, and then they're going out and doing reconnaissance, trying to find these tells they're called, that launch these Scud missiles, and if able, disabling them or destroying them. And they were in every night. And we at the time I was flying the armed Blackhawk, so we were escorting. They were primarily going in on Chinooks because the Chinooks were able to carry the ground vehicles and internally. And so, they got a load of Delta guys, their ground vehicles. They land. We're in an orbit overhead, with a cap basically providing security. And, they get everybody on the ground. They start to do their reconnaissance, and then we go back home. Well, one night we're in the cap, and then I get a call on the radio that there's been a Scud identified at a location pretty close to us, and we got a mission change to go engage it. I always wondered, were there no fixed-wing aircraft in the vicinity that could have taken it out? I don't really understand. I never did figure out the circumstances about why we were given the mission, but heck yeah, we'll take that mission. So we flew over there, and I was leading at the time, and it's just a memorable experience. I'll never forget coming over this power line and looking out in front, and there I was sitting right there broadside. I mean, it's like the biggest, if you're a hunter, the biggest buck you've ever seen in your life, just standing there saying, "Shoot me." And got some minigun rounds on it, but it was too close to shoot rockets. And after the fact, we had an intel briefing that we were told, and I don't know how accurate this is, but that the secondary blast, if we would have blown up that Scud and it had fuel in it, would have been like a space shuttle launch. I mean, that's how big that explosion would have been. And, I don't think in my mind I was thinking that, but I had enough discipline to not shoot the rockets, come back around again. And then from that point on, it's another whole nother story about a malfunction of the aircraft that kept me from shooting anymore. And we finally resolved it, but it was pretty frustrating when the aircraft wouldn't fire.
And then you ultimately got a chance to go back and hit it, right?
Well, not that night. I mean, that night we broke off, and I mean, we were troubleshooting this thing. I mean, I personally took control heads out of the lower console where the gun control box was, and was resetting the cannon plugs and putting the control box back in, coming around, trying it again. It still didn't work. And I mean, you talk about frustrating. I mean, it's like if you're a muzzle, it's like, your powder's wet. If you're a muzzle loader guy, and that buck is just standing there and you can't shoot. It was just absolutely over the top frustrating. And then we thought we fixed it, went out on another mission, same thing happened. And at that point, I was so upset. I made a statement that I didn't really mean, but I think I freaked out the crew chiefs. I said I was going to crash the aircraft into the desert. I was so upset. And I don't think those guys wanted to fly with me anymore. But for the record, I wasn't going to crash the aircraft into the desert. And we finally fixed it, realized, okay, this is the problem, resolved it, and then the war was over.
Well, that brings me to a question. How important is your relationship with the crew chief and your co-pilot?
I would say it's critical. I mean, on a single pilot aircraft, it's a whole different animal. But when you're in a crew situation, it has to be a crew, and there has to be mutual respect. I will say, and I'm proud of this, I don't think I ever got in an argument with anyone I flew with. And I know people who argued all the time. And to me, they probably should have been told, your time as an aviator has come to an end. We don't need you arguing amongst yourselves in the cockpit. And I can only imagine what it felt like as a crew chief in the back, hearing this argument going on in the front. But I never had an argument, and I certainly have had arguments in my personal life, but not in the cockpit. It was always just very professional. Everybody knew what they were supposed to be doing. And I always tried to help the crew chiefs, and I always respected their opinion. And, you know, they returned that in kind. I mean, I just remember in Somalia, you know, running out to the aircraft, and, you know, these missions we're trying to get off the ground quickly. So anything you can do to speed things up. And the crew chiefs are standing out there like squires with my survival vest and armor plate, you know, helping me get it on and stuff like that, you know, and that comes as a result of, you know, treating them with respect, and, you know, you get that in return. And, hardest working guys I've ever been around, because, you know, what people don't understand, if you're a crew chief in the Army, you're flying on the missions, but then you're doing maintenance and turning wrenches on the aircraft when the mission's over. And then you got all your other Army stuff, you know, that you got to do. They put in long hours, and they're like the linemen on a football team, right? They don't get a lot of credit, but their mission is critical, and the people who really get it appreciate what they do.
And do they are they with you for every mission? You don't cycle through, you know, get different guys each mission, right?
If we're deployed, we try to keep everybody intact, and it's you know, the intent there is to just build that synergy, and it works. I mean, you start to really know each other, and there's less communication required. You know, you just understand. Everyone's got weaknesses, so, you know, you can understand, oh, maybe that's not, you know, this person's forte, and I can fill that gap, or whatever. But it makes sense. You know, when you're back at home station, you're liable to fly with different people every other night. But on a deployment, you try to keep people with the same aircraft and the same crew.
So October 3rd, 1993, I'm sorry. Obviously, Blackhawk Down was made about it. Did they get it right?
It's accurate enough. That's my short answer. You know, I think for the average person, the mistakes from an aviation perspective. Now, you know, you would have to talk to the Delta guys and the Rangers about their perspective, but the aviation side, you know, they put me in the wrong seat. They had us playing a game over the radio at the start of the movie where Cliff and I are playing, I don't know, some word game. You know, we didn't do that kind of stuff. But again, you know, the essence of it is there. The aircraft were shot down. It was an intense firefight. The bad guys were the bad guys, and we were the good guys. And, you know, over there just trying to help the Somali people, and sort of got smacked in the face for it.
So what do you remember leading up to that before, you know, things went wrong? What do you remember about that?
Well, the operation was going really well, actually. You know, I was a flight lead on that mission, and Cliff Walcott, who's, you know, basically the originator of the ARM Blackhawk. That's why we kind of knew each other so well. He and I mean, had been, you know, around each other and flying together and supporting each other for years at this point. He's the flight lead for the assault force. I'm the flight lead for the blocking force. And we had done the mission 6 times before, and it had gone well every time, you know, both day and night. But as will happen, the enemy started to develop some counter tactics that ultimately became pretty effective, most notably using rocket propelled grenades at us. And, you know, had that been a night mission, probably wouldn't have turned out the way it did, but we launched in the day. And, you know, that's a risk factor. We acknowledged it. I don't know that anybody, you know, wanted to go in the day if we didn't have to, but the decision was, look, if we don't go now, we're going to lose the guy. 2 guys actually that were top 10 personnel in the clan, and they ended up getting captured and getting turned over, but, you know, we paid a heavy price for it.
So when your helicopter was hit, what kicked in first?
You know, like any good pilot, control the machine, right? That's got to be the number one mission. Everything else comes secondary. And I'm trying to assess what's happening. It felt like hitting a speed bump in a parking lot, because, you know, a Blackhawk's a pretty big bird. We're probably, you know, without the customers on board, sitting at around, I don't know, 17,000, 18,000 pounds. And, you know, an RPG is not a huge warhead, but we certainly felt it. And unfortunately, where it hit the aircraft caused significant damage to the tail rotor gearbox, which ultimately caused it to completely self-destruct. And initially, I'm just thinking, I'm looking around in the cockpit. I was on the controls, and everything felt okay. Knew we'd been hit, and a radio call came over the radio saying, "Hey, you better put it on the ground." And I'm like, "There's a firefight going on right here. Everything looks okay inside. Controls are all good. The airfield's right in front of me. I'm 2 miles away. I'm going to take it to the runway." So started heading that way, and within probably 10 seconds of that decision, this loud whine starts to develop and huge bang. And then the aircraft starts to spin out of control violently because the tail rotor just completely disintegrated.
Wow. How chaotic was that?
You can't describe it. I mean, honestly, if you can Google, helicopters at low speed, lost a tail rotor, and see what that looks like. I mean, you spin so fast that you can't see anything. All I could see is the horizon line because everything else is just a blur as it's going around. And obviously I'm trying to keep the aircraft from flipping upside down. And, the only way you can stop the spin is to shut the engines off. And with the way that Blackhawk's configured, if you're on the controls, you don't have access to the power control levers. The other guy's got to do it. And so Frank, my co-pilot, he'd already been in a somewhat similar incident, actually, in a Blackhawk under night vision goggles years before, and he would have known what to do anyway. But he was reaching up, and I remember saying to him, "I guess we better pull him off." And the violence of the spin was such that he couldn't keep his arms up to get the engines all the way off. The centrifugal force caused by that rotation was preventing him from keeping his arms up there. And the only reason I know that is we talked about it after we gained consciousness on the ground. Typical instructors debriefing how we handled the procedure, not really focused on the fact that we're surrounded by the enemy and we're about to get in a gunfight. But yeah, I mean, it was, of course, I don't remember hitting the ground. I think maybe it was so violent and I didn't see the ground approaching that it instantaneous. I've never had any memory of the actual impact ever. I do remember the spin. And I remember, trying to get the engines offline and I made a radio call saying that we'd lost the tail rotor and we were going in hard, because that's the next thing you should do as a good pilot, is communicate once you have control of the aircraft. And the next thing I knew, I woke up after having been knocked out.
What were you focused on first when you both woke up?
Well, it's, you're a little fuzzy. If you've ever been actually knocked out, you don't have all your acuity right when you regain consciousness. It's sort of like waking up in that hotel room that you can't even remember you checked into if you travel a lot. Like, where in the heck am I? It's just that's the feeling. And I was, trying to assess the situation, trying to figure out what my injuries were. I had a broken femur, crushed vertebrae in my spine. I'm really surprised I wasn't hurt worse than that, quite frankly, as badly as the aircraft was damaged. And then looked over at Ray, and he was sort of getting his wits about him at the same time. And he had a broken leg, but it was his lower leg, not his femur. And he was a little bit more mobile than I was, and decided that he was going to get out of the cockpit. I decided that there's no way I could do it. I mean, it's hard to get over the controls when you're healthy. With those kind of injuries, I just didn't think there's any way I could get myself out. So I was going to fight it out from the cockpit. I had my MP5 right there with me and cleared some debris out of the windshield, which we think might be what Randy Shugart and Gary Gordon actually saw when they overflew the site. They did see movement, whether it was me or Ray, I don't know. And then, I'm basically going to make my last stand. And it's not long after that Randy and Gary show up at the side of the aircraft.
Did you already know, going into this mission, did you know about what the Pakistanis went through when they were there?
Yeah, they had briefed us on that. So, being a prisoner of the Somalis was not something you wanted to experience. I can tell you that. That was one of the first things they told us, that they had beheaded them and, did the things that terrorist-like organizations do.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So when the first, when you first crashed and you got your wits about you, was there a moment where it really sank in what's about to happen here, the gunfight and who with?
Yeah, I think because the amount of time from when I regained consciousness to when Randy and Gary got there wasn't a lot of time to really do too much thinking other than I need to, try to defend myself here.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden they're standing there. And I didn't know Randy. I didn't really know Gary, but Gary had flown on my aircraft before and I recognized him. And so I knew they were Delta guys, and I assumed they were part of a rescue force. And so at that point, I'm like, man, we just went from we're dead for sure to we're rescued, all in, less than 5 minutes. And then over time, although they didn't really show it, I never saw anyone else. So I started to realize, okay, maybe this isn't a rescue force. And then, once they get me out of the aircraft, they set up a perimeter and Gary is gunned down. And now I'm back to, oh man, this is not going to go well. And at that point, I'm pretty sure it's just Randy and I who have any ability to shoot back. And he gives me Gary's weapon, and he goes around the aircraft and makes his last stand.
Did you know that they were both killed?
I was pretty sure they were. Yeah, I knew Gary was hit. I didn't know he was killed. When I was first told everyone else was dead, was in captivity, I asked. I think it was the first night. I asked my captors, anyone else. I can't remember because they don't speak great English. I don't remember exactly what I said, and they basically said no, they're all dead.
Mm. Wow. And they both got the Medal of Honor for their heroism.
Yes.
For the people that don't know that.
And at that point, it was the first Medal of Honor since the Vietnam War. And it's still the only one where two individuals got the Medal of Honor for the same act.
Wow. Well, that was well-deserved. And yeah, I love that story, at least that they got, they were recognized with that. So when you decided you were gonna, they gave you your the weapon, and you were gonna fight it out, when did you realize that this wasn't gonna be good?
Yeah, well, I heard Randy make a radio call. Right, he was standing right in front of me, and I think he called on what we call the fires net, for the status of the rescue force. So at that point, I know, okay, this is not the rescue force. He's asking for the status of the rescue force. And the radio call came back saying that a force was en route, which is cause for a little bit of optimism. I mean, somebody's on the way. We just got to hold out a little bit longer. And then Randy went around the nose, and when he went down, the shooting stopped, and that's when I knew, this is the end. And at that point, I was out of rounds again, and was, as you mentioned, we knew what happened to the Pakistanis, so I was pretty sure that was about to happen to me.
Did you ever think about? It sounds stupid to ask it like this. Did you ever think about killing yourself, committing suicide? So that
people have asked me. Yeah, people have asked me that, and no, it never entered my mind. Never entered my mind. I don't know why. I'm sure survival instincts are different for everyone when it really gets down to it. But no, absolutely not. I did have a survival knife. I probably could have. I also had a pistol that I never took out of the holster. I don't know why. It never even entered my mind. I was totally focused on the MP5 and then Gary's weapon. And then when in my mind, I'm out of rounds, and probably saved my life, actually, because if that mob comes around the nose of the aircraft and I'm pointing a pistol at them, I'm dead. It's just.
So what happened next? You're out of ammo. You're laying there. How did the Somalis approach you?
Yeah, they were an angry mob. The only thing that I know of that's happened that I think is similar to this were the SEALs at the bridge in Fallujah. I mean, it was that kind of violence. I mean, they are bloodthirsty, I haven't talked about it much because I just never really knew what the families actually knew. But over time, I've come to learn that the families knew everything. I mean, the remains of some of these guys were brought back in a garbage bag. I mean, they were dismembered. I mean, it was like I never thought humans could be that brutal. And I guess I'm naive, right? Because we grew up in this amazing country and we don't experience this kind of insane violence, and we should be thankful for that. And again, I guess I'm naive, right? But I was kind of shocked. And initially, they were going to beat me to death. I mean, they broke my nose, my cheekbone, my eye socket. They're ripping all my gear off, and Mark Bowden is the one who apparently discovered this, that somebody there knew that I had that Adid, who was the number one target we were after, wanted a prisoner. And this guy comes to the realization that this is the only American left alive here. We've got him. Let's not kill him. And he stops the mob by firing shots in the air. And the last thing I remember after they got all my gear off was they threw dirt in my face. And we had this, all it was a piece of green cardboard laminated that was our pass to get in and out of the Task Force Ranger compound. And when they ripped that off from around my neck, they stuck it in my face and said, Ranger, Ranger, you die, Somalia. And so they knew who we were. And again, I'm just, at this point, I'm in survival mode. I'm not, I got to make it through the next 30 seconds. And then they wrapped a rag around my head and they hoisted me up in the air and carried me through the streets like a trophy. And at some point, my femur goes out the backside of my leg somewhere here in the sequence. And I honestly don't, I mean, with all the throwing around they did really over the whole time I was in captivity, how my femoral artery did not get nicked is still a mystery. I mean, there's a hole that's, it's the size of a 50-cent piece in the back of my leg from, the bone's sharp enough to do that. How did it not possibly nick that femoral artery? It's just incredible, but it didn't. And never got infected either, which is another, we were taking antibiotics as a proactive measure, knowing, if somebody gets wounded, this is a nasty place. Maybe it makes sense to put people on antibiotics. And that's the beauty of these units, right? You get things that maybe not everyone else gets, and we had our own internal doctors and surgeons, and I mean, it's a great place to be, when the chips are down, because if there's an asset available that can help you, it's probably there. And, just a small example is the doctors prescribing us with these antibiotics, which probably helped keep me from getting an infection.
Well, when I was in the Navy and we were going to Pakistan, which can't be much better than Mogadishu, they had us taking some kind of anti-malaria pills and all kinds of stuff, so we didn't get sick in that country. I even questioned why we're even stopping there, but
yeah,
we did anyway. So I heard you describe how especially the women were when you were captured. I mean, what was that like?
They, again, I got this rag around my head, so all I can hear is voices, but they seem to be the most aggressive, during that chaotic scene where I'm being carried through the streets, and, they're hitting me and screaming and punching me, and probably because they're, their loved one, their husband, their son, whatever is, injured or killed in the firefight. I mean, this firefight was gigantic. I only give you this number because it helps put it in perspective. I've heard estimates of 800 Somalis killed and 2,000 wounded. I mean, there's not too many modern day battles, ground battles, where, the numbers are that high. So, huge losses. And our unit, we think, fired 175,000 rounds of 7.62 ammunition in that 18 hours. And that's the door gunners and the little bird gunbirds. I mean, that's a lot of ammo.
Yeah. Those little birds, those are cool aircraft.
They are, and that, that's their ideal scenario: urban environment, close quarters, customers in contact. They're hard to hit, because they're not very big. They get a lot of firepower, and they can their return to target is really quick because like for a Blackhawk, yeah, we got maybe a little bit more firepower, but it's going to take me a little bit longer to come back around and make another pass. The little birds are, with two aircraft, they can almost keep sustained fire on the target. Not quite, but pretty close.
So for the next 11 days, you were a POW. I mean, what was that like? I'm sure whatever you learned in SEER school, you put to good use. But that first night you were a POW, did they even let you sleep? Was there more torture?
Yeah, no, I did sleep. I mean, I was exhausted, whether it's from the injuries or the trauma of everything. The doctors told me after the fact that I was probably in shock. I didn't feel like I was in shock, but I don't know what shock feels like, but I did fall asleep. There was a battle raging right near where I was being held that first night, and I thought it was again another rescue attempt, that because we had reconnaissance birds up, and I'm thinking, okay, somebody tracked me here and they know where I am and they're coming to rescue me. But then the thing went right on by, and I think probably what it was is just a convoy trying to get to the crash site to ultimately, reinforce and get everybody out of there the following day. But they had chained me up with like a little dog chain. I was able to actually escape that. And, when I heard them approaching the room, I'd wrap the chain back around my wrist so they would think I hadn't gotten out of it. But I was able to do things like, get the dirt out of my eyes and straighten my leg out, and, things that they're certainly not going to help a lot, but they're slight, small improvements. And the next day, when I woke up, someone had opened the door and fired a round into the room. That the round ended up in my left arm, so now I've been shot. And it's just, again, like, when is this going to end? And no, it's not going to end, unfortunately.
And that second day, is that when they asked you to do the video?
Yep, they asked me, and of course I said no. But I also realized, if they bring a camera in here to film me, I can't stop them. So what do I do? And, in SEER school, obviously you're trained what to do in this scenario. I wanted to avoid it, but I knew I couldn't. And so I began refreshing myself on what they had taught me 5 years before. It is one of the things that again, there's a lot of things to stay proficient at in the job that we do, but I'd probably not done a very good job of staying proficient at what they taught me in survival school, and trying to remember certain things that the fundamentals are easy to remember. It's this sort of the technical things that or very specific things that I was struggling to recall, and but when it came down to it and they began the questioning, I used the techniques that they had taught me to use, and they worked really effectively.
So, pretty much every man and woman my age and maybe a little younger remembers seeing that video. What was going through your mind when you were recording that?
When I look at it, I see frustration because I can't solve the problem. I can't. I don't know where anyone else is. I'm not sure at that point if they had already told me that everyone was lost. I don't know where I am. I don't know what's going on with the mission. I don't know how long I'm going to be in captivity. I don't know how long I'm going to survive. It was just frustration. There's just no way out of this dilemma. And then, after sort of thinking and thinking and thinking, because they were after two specific questions. One was they wanted me to say we were killing innocent people, and they wanted me to say that we shouldn't be there. And I didn't see either. I didn't say either one. I said innocent people being killed is not good. And then I said, I'm a soldier. I do what I'm told when asked about the mission. And in the end, I don't think they knew what I said. I think they thought they had me on camera answering these questions, and they rushed out the door. And actually, the cameraman was a freelance guy working as a subcontractor to CNN, and he uploaded that video to Atlanta, and they broadcast it within about 15 minutes of it being shot. And this is, freaking whatever, 40 years ago, 30 years ago. I have to do the math.
Mike Durant, U.S. Army. U.S. Army. I'm a Blackhawk pilot. Blackhawk pilot. Soldier has to do what I'm told. Innocent people being killed is not good. Soldier has to do what I'm told.
And in the end, at least the Joint Personnel Recovery people will tell you that the video helped me. It didn't help them, because now you have proof of life. And now our side's got something to go on. We know he's alive. We kind of got some idea of his injuries. We know the Somalis have him. They're supposed to abide by the Geneva Convention, which they're not going to do. They don't care about it, but at least, officially they're supposed to. But it didn't feel like when it was over, like, yeah, man, I got you guys. You know what I mean? It was like, I don't know whether that was good or bad. I'm just glad it's over,
Right.
And I'm glad I had the training, because without the training, I don't know what I would have done. You're told big four, nothing more, unless you go to survival school. And, that's name, rank, service number, date of birth. But that doesn't work. I mean, it didn't work in Vietnam, I can tell you that. And that's why high-risk personnel go to survival school, so you can learn there's a way to handle this, and this is how you do it.
So how long were you in captivity before they gave you a radio?
Yeah, so, they kept asking me what I wanted. The Somalis had damage control to do here, because, again, I hate to talk about it, but they had dragged the bodies through the streets and were celebrating dead Americans. I mean, that just, again, is so far over the line. I can't comprehend it. And the world kind of looked at them as savages. I mean, like, this is unacceptable by anybody's standards. And they realized that pretty quickly, and were in the process of trying to figure out, and it's ultimately why I get released. I mean, former Ambassador Robert Oakley is the one that convinced them that, they had damage control to do, and a good step in that direction would be to let me go, because I had no value to them. And they agreed because they trusted him, and they let me go. But, the radio came a few days later. I remembered a lesson from survival school where if your captors are not asking you to do anything, and they're willing to give you something that is going to help you in some way, take it. I mean, it wasn't like, well, if you make this political statement, we'll give you a radio. They just said, do you want anything? And I said, no. I kept answering, I just want a ticket home. That was my answer. And ultimately they said, would you like a radio? And I'm like, okay, sure. So they gave it to me, and I was able to listen to Armed Forces and the British Broadcasting Company on this little transistor radio. And I kept it turned really low, because I didn't want anyone outside of where I was being held hearing this English broadcast and getting a hint that I was in there. So, but it was helpful. I mean, that's where I found out about how some of the remains had not been returned, and then ultimately how before I got released, they had all the missing were returned, and that in fact no one else had survived.
What were the conditions like? I think people, when they think POW, they think, solitary confinement, cage. What was it?
Right. And which is my main comments back to survival school, that there's not too many people that face those kind of situations these days. It's more like my experience where, initially I was just in a room somewhere. I don't, if I had to, it was like a pavilion is the way I remember it, with a concrete floor and one door in and out. I mean, was very bizarre was the day after the battle, I'm laying there in this pavilion and I can hear outside there's children playing and they're laughing in the streets, just surreal. And then I got moved to what I called the Hotel Nowhere, which it looked like an old motel. It was, there was like a balcony and then rooms all along the balcony. And I just ended up in one of those rooms, like down the balcony a certain distance. And there was a woman there who sort of ran the place that brought me food a couple of times. And then the third place, this is all within 11 days, getting moved around. The third place was, again, maybe a small compound, but a private residence. And I was just in one of the rooms in the house. That was, being guarded. Most of the houses there have some sort of security wall, sort of like if you think about the Bin Laden compound, right, with the wall around it. There's a lot of that type of houses there for the more wealthy people that need to protect themselves from the crazies that are out there. But it was filthy. The water was horrible. I got really sick. They fed me a variety of things from an MRE that looked like it was from the Civil War to a banana to a old can of soda. The woman at the place brought me a bowl of pasta with camel meat in it. So it was just a variety of things. And I knew I had to eat, right? I mean, I really wasn't hungry, but I knew I had to eat to survive.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, back then, I don't know if you can see over my right shoulder, there's a picture of Colin Powell. I sent him a letter after seeing all what happened to all you guys, being broadcast on TV, and just voicing my, my disbelief and, that commenting that they need to do something. I got back that beautiful autographed picture of Colin Powell and a letter thanking me for writing him, but there was nothing in there about that. But I'm sure I'm not the only person in the country that was writing letters to our government saying they need to do something about that. It was pretty bad, but I'm glad at least I have that picture. But wow, that was rough to watch.
Yeah. He retired while we were in Somalia. When I say we, while the U.S. military was in Somalia. So he was watching all of this, as a retired chairman. And I'm sure emotions ran high because, he was a Vietnam vet. And there's if you draw the similarities, the three that, although the scale is dramatically different, but have a lot of common themes, is Vietnam, Somalia, and Afghanistan. I mean, they just mismanagement at the highest level, failed political agenda, no clarity of mission, just all sorts of resources, you name it. Basically, the senior leadership failed the folks on the ground. And, I quote him all the time, actually. He had a leadership presentation where he said the commander in the field is always right and the rear echelon is always wrong unless proven otherwise. And to me, that's the essence of the problem in Somalia. We did not get the resources we wanted to more safely prosecute that mission. Would we have suffered losses? Yes, we would have suffered losses, but not the scale that we did.
Yeah. I always thought he should run for president, but he obviously had no interest in politics.
And, I can't blame him. It takes a different kind of person. I don't know. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. So, I guess the part of the story that I like, not that there's a good part, but you got to see a nurse, Suzanne. I don't recall her last name.
Suzanne Hofstetter. She was actually a International Committee of the Red Cross representative. And the Somalis showed up and said, hey, we can take you to see the American. And she agreed to go. And I always respect her courage because, they put a bag over her head, didn't want her to know where they were going. She had no security and she showed up, and just her showing up made my life better. They had cleaned the room. I mean, the room was filthy. They swept all the dead flies out. They cleaned me up a little bit, actually gave me some clean pajamas to wear. I mean, up to that point was still in my desert trousers that I had worn when I got shot down, and my brown t-shirt. I think I still had it on. Yeah. And I got to write a letter to the unit. I got to write a letter to my family. It was very emotional, to get to hold hands with someone who you can't completely trust, because, sometimes you can get deceived, but I felt pretty confident that she was who she said she was. And it was a pretty powerful moment.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And was she the one that brought you the Bible?
She sent it later. They didn't let her have time to grab anything when they first came, without warning. But it was sent later in a box of items, along with a couple of paperback books and pen, paper, some weird stuff that they just kind of threw in the box, thinking it would make my time a little less miserable.
And did your faith change at all while you were held captive?
Well, not necessarily while I was held captive, but afterwards, I really struggled with how this could possibly have happened. Again, I didn't know about the bodies being dragged through the streets. I knew about what had happened at Crash Site 2, but once I got exposed to the full story, knowing why we were there to begin with. Now, when I say we, our mission, Task Force Ranger, was to capture Adid and his leadership, because he was a bad guy. But the overall mission that drove U.S. involvement was to end starvation. It wasn't, they're not a strategic adversary. There's no resources there. It was a peacekeeping operation to feed starving people. And we get this in return. I couldn't reconcile it. And so I kind of questioned my belief in God, and how God could have allowed something like that to happen. But then it came around, and I've I've committed to the philosophy that I think all people of faith subscribe to, which is it's God's plan. You don't know why things happen. They just are happening for a reason. And, you may never know, but we're part of that plan. And somehow, some way, there's something positive that must be coming out of it. And actually, years later, I thought, well, you know what? If Somalia never happens, do we lose a lot more people in the global war on terror? Because we learned a lot of lessons in Somalia that were applied to how we prosecuted targets and chased people, life-saving techniques, ammunition, all sorts of things were changed. And so maybe that's it. Maybe we had to sacrifice those great Americans to save who knows how many more in the years that follow. And, I'm not in a position where I can say that's absolute truth, but it's my mortal man's way of maybe coming up with a reason.
Right. Well, everything does happen for a reason. And you kept a journal in the Bible. I think that was absolutely genius. Were you surprised they let you keep it?
No, because there was a mutual respect. I mean, they're Muslim, and I was reverent when they prayed right in the room with me. And, I didn't, disturb them when they were doing that. And they didn't disturb me when I was reading the Bible. And, the hostility really went away after a few days. And, it wasn't necessarily a strategy that I had, but in the end, the Red Cross described it as a reverse Stockholm syndrome. They said that the Somalis actually liked me and sympathized with my dilemma. And that's a great situation to be in if you can pull that off. And again, I can't take credit for saying I'm going to make them like me, but they certainly softened up a lot. And to the point where I'm not sure Farimbi, who was the head guard, I'm not sure he would have killed me. I don't know. It's hard to say. We never got to that, but he, I guess I became humanized to them. And it wasn't just this object that fell from the sky.
So back home, how was your family dealing with all this at the time?
Well, the unit was, doing what the unit always does, covering the bases across the board. I mean, they had people working with the family. They had a good friend of mine who was actually at the time in an exchange program with the Air Force, come back up and stay at the house with the family. They obviously had security people if we needed them. My father got read on to some of the things they were trying to do to figure out where I was. I'm sure that kind of blew his mind because, at the time we still weren't really talking about our operational missions a whole lot. And, to find out what the heck was going on for real, I'm sure was really eye-opening for him. And then handling all the PR stuff and then trying to plan a rescue. It was all happening simultaneously.
Did your wife know ahead of time that, you were going to be on TV, or did she find out like all of us?
No, CNN actually called the family about 5 minutes, I think, before it aired and said, "Hey, we just want to give you a heads up. There's a video that's coming out. Your son, husband's alive. Tune in." And then they saw it.
What was your release like?
A sort of a Keystone Cops kind of thing. They brought in a Nigerian prisoner who they had been holding for a while. He was really happy. And I couldn't speak to him, but I could tell, that he'd been mistreated and was told that he was about to be released also. And then a Red Cross doctor came in, gave me morphine, and that's when I started to believe this was real, because I hadn't had anything really other than aspirin up to that point. And had me fill out a Red Cross form. And again, I'm still trying to keep my guard up. What if this isn't real? What if they're trying to just get more information out of me? But it became pretty obvious quickly that it was real. And then this delegation of dignitaries came into the room to drink tea, and sort of like a little mini celebration that I'm being released. And they were not Somalis. I don't know if they were from Nairobi or where they were from, but they came in. I mean, it was just bizarre, right? I guess it's sort of a little farewell party. And then they stuck me on a litter. And again, I'm in this house, and the hallways are not set up to where you can carry a litter. So they had to kind of tilt me up, and I almost slid off the thing. And that's why I say it was Keystone Coppage. Then they got out to the street, and the media was there. So they must have told the media, because there is footage of me actually being carried on this litter out to this vehicle. And then they stuck me in the back, and the litter's too long for the doors to close. So they got a guy on each side holding the litter and then holding the door. And we're going through this city that has opposing Klan members everywhere. So, they are trying to get through the crowds quickly. And we pull up to a traffic jam, and there's this vehicle next to us. You can call it a people mover. It's got just people piled all over it. And people are looking down into this van, and they can see me, and I'm obviously not a Somali. Start pointing, and I think somebody realized we better get out of here. And they, jammed on the gas. I start to slide out the back of the van. Luckily, they had a good grip on me, and I didn't go all the way out. They pulled me back in. And then we get to the compound, the UN compound. And Farimbi, who's the guy I just mentioned, the head guard, has got a Somali National Alliance T-shirt on, which is basically the Haber-Getter clan. And we get to the gate, and he flashes UN credentials to get in. And I'm like, this is mind blown, right? Like, this guy is probably top 20 on the list for us to apprehend in the Deeds Haber-Getter clan, and he's got free access to the UN compound. And this is just the nature of these, complex situations where you just don't know who's who. And, the locals are running around because you don't have the resources to do all the things you need to do to support your force. And, and that's why, we lost probably way more than we should have in Afghanistan to folks that we thought were on our side that were not, Right. And they're very complicated situations. And anyhow, I lost track of them. And then the first person I saw was the lawyer for Task Force Ranger is a JAG officer who I recognized. And he's like, holy cow, they really did release him. And he got word back that I was inside the compound, and that part of the journey was over.
Wow. And a long road to recovery. So
Yeah.
you and I believe in the same saying, is that a service member dies twice, when their heart stops and the last time their name is spoken. And we talked about Master Sergeant Gary Ivan Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randall Randy Shugart. So I just wanted to mention their names again. And I wanted to ask you, what do you want people to understand about them?
Well, about them, but everybody really in Task Force Ranger is everyone put it all on the line. You know, they more so probably than anyone, but everybody put it on the line and refused to give up on their brothers in arms. And that's pretty much the culture that exists in our military. Now, is that every single person? Probably not. But the folks that are out there in harm's way and build those bonds and volunteer to be at the point of the spear, it absolutely exists. And there was a no quit mentality. I mean, we had over 70 people wounded. Now, the assault force was just over 100 people. So when you're down to that kind of casualty rate, it's pretty much over in any battle in history. But you know, whether it was the Little Birds or the resupply mission flown by my good friend Stan Wood, or you know, Dan Gelada flying the SOAR bird to get people on the first crash site, or Randy and Gary, or the guys that ultimately did get to our crash site later on in the evening, and the folks that don't usually get enough, never get enough recognition, is the 10th Mountain guys, the Pakistanis and the Malaysians. You know, they were thrown into this at the 11th hour, and they came out there and fought that fight to rescue or help extract, I should say is a better term, the remaining members of Task Force Ranger, and then those who had been lost in the fight. It wasn't a lot, you know. I think and maybe not, but I think generally speaking, history looks at it as a loss. But you know, if losing people is criteria for a loss, then we're never going to win another conflict, because I mean, it's virtually impossible to do something and take no losses.
Right.
Certainly something that requires a sustained operation. You know, a one-off maybe, but sustained operations, it's virtually impossible. So it has to be factored into the equation. It's part of why I wanted to run for office, because people have to understand that when we commit to military action, we're basically saying we're willing to lose people, because, you know, this is important enough to lose people. And I just don't think everyone gets that. And I don't think, I can guarantee you Les Aspin didn't get it, because I was there when he walked into the memorial ceremony at Delta, and he saw the families, and he saw what we typically do now, which most people have seen, but wasn't all that common at the time, which is to represent the fallen, the boots, the rifle, goggles, headgear, you know. And I think if that was the point where he realized the decisions we made caused this loss of life. Yep. And he was never the same, as I understand it. Not enough people appreciate the significance of taking military action. And, you know, there's more and more people running for office now that have military experience. And that's a good thing, because we need more. We had a good percentage of people in office had it, you know, post World War II, because so many people served, but now it's less and less and less. So we just have to get people in there that have the life experience and can voice their opinions and influence the decisions.
Well, the people that get it are definitely the people that served. And we're cursed with hindsight. You think it would have been different if you would have gotten the things that you wanted, the AC-130, the aircraft carrier, the tanks?
For sure. Absolutely no question about it. Now, Would we have lost people? Probably, because they were prepared for a knockdown, drag out fight. I mean, they were all in, and that would have caused us to almost certainly take some losses. But the number of losses, I mean, the tank would have substituted for the search and rescue bird and would have got people to the crash site and not turned this into an 18-hour saga. The last member of Task Force Ranger who's killed is actually killed the next day, standing in the compound on the airfield. We wanted to be on an aircraft carrier. We didn't want to be on the airfield because we could have had force protection and the element of surprise. There wasn't anything else going on in the world. We're all ship qualified. We've operated off ships before, but it was denied. And right there, cut and dry, that individual would not have lost his life had that asset been provided. And again, you can go through others who lost their lives trying to do with inadequate resources what could have been done more easily with the right resources.
You stayed in the Army after all of this, and they said you'd never fly again. You proved them wrong.
They don't know what they're talking about all the time.
Did your family try to talk you out of that?
No. I love the unit. I mean, I still love the unit. I'm proud to be associated with it. And, anyone that's been there and served there and doesn't love it, I can't understand, because, man, what a place. And if you want to be in the action and you're a helicopter guy or a support, that's where you go. I stayed for 8 more years. I knew I could serve in a capacity. And I love what my regimental commander said to me. Del Daly's his name. He brought me in his office, and he said, when I got finally recovered enough where I could come back to duty, he said, "You can have any job in this regiment except mine." He didn't really mean it, right? He's not going to make me first battalion commander, but the whole idea is, look, we know you put it on the line for us. We're going to do everything we can to support you and your family.
So did your captors ever try to contact you after all this?
Oh, yeah. Yep. I was contacted, and, I didn't know, again, there's no manual on what to do here, right? It's all, you got to kind of go with your gut. So I went to our intel officer after being contacted, and I said, "Hey, this guy wants to meet with me. I don't know what risks involved. I don't know if I should." And I was a little disappointed, actually. I didn't get a whole lot of guidance. I mean, he basically said, "It's your call, but you're not violating anything, that I'm aware of." So I agreed to do it. And I'm not trained in this sort of spy craft, but I tried to do the common sense things. I got there early, sort of canvassed the place, made sure it was a public location, got a vantage point where I could see when this individual arrived, to see if he was by himself or he's talking to anybody or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he shows up, and Somalis just have a very unique physical characteristics to me. They're very slender, dark complexion, and I knew, he's based on his garb and the way he looked, I knew it was him as soon as he arrived. And it looked like he was by himself. I waited for a few minutes. He just sat there, and I approached him, and he gave me letters from Adid, of all people, Farimbi, the head guard, and then the doctor who had seen me, the Somali doctor. And they basically wanted me to become a liaison between the Somalis and the American people to try to patch things up. And I was like, it's no way. It's too soon. I can't. There's no way I can do this. I mean, I suppose you could argue it could have been for the greater good, but there was just too much emotion at the time, too much bitterness, too much anger, and I just felt like there's no way I can do it. But I tried to turn it on him, and I said, I know, I'm pretty sure it was Stephanie Shugart who had asked if I had any idea where Randy's wedding ring was. And I said, no. And I thought, well, maybe we could see if there's some goodwill here. And I said to them, there's one thing you could do for us. Some of the personal effects from the guys that lost their lives there are missing. Can you find any of them? And, they never found any. I mean, I'm sure they were lost to who knows who in the population. Right. Somehow Adid's son ends up with my ID tags. that he's got later on in life that he bragged about somewhere along the way. But anyway, yeah. So I did write a letter back to Farimbi because he did some things that I thought went above and beyond. And all I did was say, I thanked him, and I just said, look, I wish you all the best. You probably are part of why I survived. No one else is, but you probably are. And never heard from him again. I'm sure he's dead now.
One of the stories that I like that you tell is that your wife is also a pilot. Who's the better pilot?
Well, I can't answer that because we've never flown together. That's the safe answer.
And she outranked you. Did she ever make you salute her?
All the time.
So being a grandfather, how does your perspective on things change?
Well, first of all, it kind of sneaks up on you, right? In my mind, I'm still in my 40s. Yeah. But no, it's just amazing to see them. And what you hope for them is that they can have all the wonderful experiences and opportunities that I had in my life. I mean, I hope the best is not behind us. I hope, because it was an amazing life. Yeah, what we just talked about was horrible, but overall, it was an amazing life. I had some amazing friends and amazing experiences, and so much to be thankful for. And I just hope that the best is out front and not behind us as a nation, and for them.
Probably not one of the best experiences when you ran for Senate.
Yeah, my running joke is I'd rather talk about Somalia. It's not quite that bad, but it's almost that bad.
Right. Well, so when I originally contacted you about doing this, I also told you that I bought your book, In the Company of Heroes. And your suggestion to me was read the book and then let's schedule something after. So I have your book over here.
Awesome.
And I'm glad you recommended that I read it because I got a really great insight into who you are. And the book, it's about leadership and perseverance and brotherhood, sacrifice, mental toughness, discipline. And it's really an amazing read. And I recommend anybody that loves military history, firsthand accounts to pick this book up. But I have to ask, so was it hard to relive these moments while you were writing it?
Actually, writing it was not hard. It was, I think the word, if I say it correctly, is cathartic. I didn't think it was going to be, but it felt good when it was over. It's like, all right, it's my version of it, right? Mm-hmm. Because everyone has a slightly different perspective, and I'm sure some things are on the hairy edge of almost being maybe not exactly right. I'm not sure, but it is how I remember it. And it's all exactly as I remember it. And getting it just written down and documented felt good. Now, years later, I thought, well, I don't remember some of the stuff that made it in and didn't make it in. So maybe I should read it again. And I tried to read it. I couldn't do it. I mean, I don't know what it was. Because I don't really have that much trouble talking about it at this point, because I've probably talked about it 1,000 times. But I don't know, reading the book, I got partway in and I was like, I just don't need to do this. It's sort of like watching Blackhawk Down. I think I've watched the whole movie maybe twice, and there's no interest in watching it again. I mean, it isn't quite as real as the book to me because it's actors. And it doesn't necessarily bring back as strong an emotion, but I have no desire to watch it again.
So after I read the book, I was like, okay, I want to watch Blackhawk Down again because it's been a long time since I've seen it. Why did they end the movie the way they did? Because people that don't know your story will think, whatever happened to Mike Durant.
Well, that's why I wrote the book. It was really the inspiration to actually write it. When Blackhawk Down came out, I didn't want to go to the premieres. I didn't want to. I was not sure how I was going to react to it. So I waited. I thought about it. The crowds kind of died down, and it's about to, go off into, I think at the time it probably would have been on VHS actually. And I finally one morning woke up and said, all right, I think I'm ready to go see it. And the theater was almost empty. And just like you just described, when it got to the end, and I know the book is sort of the same way, but I'm like, wow, this movie did really well. The book did really well. There's got to be people wondering what happened. And I've already got an outline because I had done that. But our unit was, and the units where we support then were not real big on writing books. And so I was very hesitant to do it. But it had been at that point over 10 years. And I was retired. There was nothing in there that I was going to write about that was, current operations. I consulted some folks in, former leaders of mine about it. And they said, you shouldn't have any trouble or any concerns about doing it. So I did it. And in the end, it felt good. And I did follow, even though at the time there was no formal guidance that I was aware of. I sent it to all the supported units, intel officers, and the 160th. And they asked me to take some stuff out, which I did, other than the stupid stuff. That I'm like, look, this is in Blackhawk Down. Okay. I think we're okay leaving this in. I'll take the risk. So some of it I didn't take out, but I did take some that had not been publicly disclosed at that point. And never got any back. In fact, the units asked me to come do presentations after the fact, to their people. So I don't sense that there's any negative consequences of actually writing it.
I don't know how many people ask this, but Somalians have been in the news a lot lately. I looked this up. In 1993, there were probably on the low end, about 2,500 Somalis in this country. Now there's probably 1 million. Does that surprise you?
I wouldn't have been able to throw the number 1 million out there, but I certainly am well aware that there are large numbers, and unfortunately aware of why they have made the news as often as they have. And coincidentally, before the whole daycare thing came up, I did a presentation for law enforcement in Minnesota probably a couple of years ago now. And these are all undercover drug guys and gals. And they were explaining to me how difficult it is dealing with the Somali element of this criminal activity because they can't figure out who anybody is. There's no good record of they're not citizens. How did they get here? When did they get here? Who are they? A lot of them have the same name, and it's really difficult trying to conduct law enforcement operations and then prosecute because it's just,
right.
And I guess it shouldn't have come as a surprise that the whole daycare thing blew up. Part of it, and they're not all bad people. I mean, they're, it's like any group of people. What percent are bad? I can't tell you, but I will say a contributing factor, I would say, is that culturally to them, if you as a government agency are going to give me money and not hold me accountable, I'll take it, So the real blame goes on the folks that didn't hold them accountable and didn't go verify that, things were as they should be. And it seemed pretty easy to figure out, and nobody took the time to do it.
Yep. So after all these years, have you forgiven your captors?
Well, I'm somewhat sympathetic to the Somali people in general because I know what a crap hole it is. And it's a tough place to grow up as a person. I think it's very difficult for someone who grew up in the U.S. to even relate to or even try to get their head around. But I don't forgive those who did the horrendous acts that are to me forever are unforgivable. They're just, that's over the line. There's combat, there's conflict, but that's just unacceptable. And I can never forgive that.
Well, it makes me wonder how many of those people, even the young kids that, engaged in that savagery that day, that time, are actually here right now. So
Yeah, I can't say obviously, but there's almost 100% guarantee that there's some connection to it for sure.
yep. Well, I only have a couple more questions here for you, and then I'll let you go. I'm sure your family's waiting for you. But looking back on your career, what are you most proud of?
Proud of what I accomplished in the unit, really, because we built the armed Blackhawk from drawing on paper what we thought we wanted it to look like to reality, and it's still today. I mean, it was instrumental in the Venezuela mission. It was instrumental in Iraq and Afghanistan. The customers love it. It's an amazing platform. And then things I did after the fact, I got involved in the training and mission rehearsal side that I think were game changers. I really do. I mean, we talked earlier about how critical it is to be prepared to go execute these operations, and all the tools that we developed to help people do that, I think are, part of what shores up success. And then I think the legacy, there's a legacy that's associated with that unit that I think I've upheld. Obviously I probably have gotten orders of magnitude more attention than most folks that walk through the door there. And it's been something I've tried to do is to represent well, because the unit deserves it, the people deserve it, and the customers deserve it.
Well, speaking of the Venezuela mission, the first Night Stalker to ever receive the Medal of Honor, what were your thoughts when Chief Warrant Officer 5 Slover got the Medal of Honor?
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a conversation with the Air Mission Commander. He went through the whole mission and looked at all the planning information and saw parts of the aircraft, and he upheld what Night Stalkers stand for. I mean, Night Stalkers don't quit. It's the mission first. We're going to do what we need to do to make it happen. I was surprised to learn how badly injured he was. I mean, when you saw him at the ceremony, there was really no indication that, at least as I understand it, I mean, he really could have died. He was hit pretty bad, and kept Night Stalking, just like those who have come before him and those who will continue to serve.
Well, that was actually going to be my last question. So, what does Night Stalkers Don't Quit mean to you?
A mission first. We're going to do whatever we can do to make the mission happen, and I'd like to think I did it every time, and there's scores of other Night Stalkers that have done it throughout the unit's history. And the folks that get overlooked are the people that are in support, right? You only see the tip of the iceberg. You see the flight crews and you see the aircraft, and you don't realize all the maintenance that went into all that, and all the logistics, and all the folks that working on the procurement of the assets. And it's a machine, and it's a well-oiled machine, and the results, I think, prove just what an amazing machine it is.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm sure your customers, when they knew the Night Stalkers were taking them on their mission, were heading out with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, I mean, there's a relationship there that is going to be tough to ever break, if ever. And it's been earned through the blood, sweat, and sacrifice of a lot of great people.
I really appreciate you doing this with me. It really means a lot. This was such an honor for me. For anyone listening, go check out, buy the book, In the Company of Heroes, watch Blackhawk Down. And again, Mike, thank you for doing this.
It's my pleasure. Good luck with it. And it's been great talking to you.
All right. Have a wonderful evening.
All right.
Thank you very much. All right.
All right.
All right.